what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Lineage Break, a Grand Archive TCG podcast. I am your host, Cam. With me, as always, is Steven. Hello, Steven.
Hello, Cameron.
Welcome back, Steven. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's been a while.
It feels like it's been a while.
Yeah, it literally hasn't. It's been like a week, right?
It's been exactly 7 days like normal, but
it feels there's like a lot that happened last weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a busy weekend.
That drive was a lot.
It was a lot. We went to Pennsylvania regionals last week, so shout out to the Banishstone. They ran a great event. It's a lovely store. It's my first time over there, and it's a great place. 2 floors, pretty crazy. Large turnout, 63 players. I'm gonna air my grievance, Stephen. I'm gonna air my grievance. Thank you so much to the Banishstone. It's a great store. You guys should check it out. However, 63-person tournament. They did have pizza. The pizza was great. Thank you for the pizza. 63-player tournament. 7 rounds for no reason. No actual reason was the 63-player tournament run an extra round. And not only did we have a 6-hour drive home, which was brutal to have to stay an extra hour. Got home at 4 a.m. to open the store that morning at 9. But also, I was 4-2 at the end of round 6, and I was not 5-2 at the end of round 7. We'll say that. So, 6 rounds, please, for 64-player tournaments. That's how math works. Anyways, it was a great event. I'm sure we'll be back. It was a very good time. Lovely people. Great turnout.
Yeah.
We all scrubbed out. We took like 11 people from our locals down to the tournament, and we all scrubbed out. Couple of people made top 16, but no backup chargers. Nope. Which is pretty sad. So, we did our best.
I was in the cool room all day, though, so I'm not complaining.
It was nice. It was nice to be the Banished Zone, or the basement. The Banished
I was
basement
banished into the Banished Zone.
Was nice
surely.
and it was nice and cool down there, non-crowded.
Yeah. Get to play against some really lovely people. Have a lot of fun conversations with the people that were just down there having fun.
Yeah, it was a good time. Lots of singles at the store too.
Yeah,
picked up some singles, which is cool.
I picked up some place at a dong for tonight.
Oh, nice. Woo!
I'm gonna be playing some dong tonight.
Speaking of dong, not really, but kind of. Also, while we were gone, was the design notes for HVN. We've been talking about them for a couple of weeks. It feels like we've been talking forever about spoiler season and what are the new champions going to do and what is the set going to look like. And over the course of the past week, not only have we gotten the design notes, which we were sort of assured to get on the developer stream last Saturday, but we've also just gotten a metric ton of spoilers. We've seen so many cards to the point where if I don't see 6 or 7 spoilers throughout a 24-hour period, I start to have withdrawals, because we've been seeing so many cards. Stayed up till 2 in the morning last night for more spoilers. I think today we have a bit of a break. Our next spoilers are not until tomorrow afternoon. So, but our plan here at the Lineage Break podcast, we know that you guys care about Grand Archive and can look at spoilers. We're not going to spend our time looking at literally every single spoiler under the sun. There's plenty of ways that you can do that. However, we're going to talk about sort of the set as a whole. We're going to talk about the champion lineages. Those will, talk about very specifically some key cards maybe that have been spoiled that will give us an idea of maybe what those champions are looking like, and we will give you our opinions on those sort of archetypes rather than covering every single common that we've seen. We're just going to try to hit on a few of those, and we want to give a huge shout out to Trevor, who is producing the stream today from Proxies Codex. We will, of course, be using Proxies Codex to find all of our spoilers, and you can too if you want to follow along. Go to proxiescodex.com. He will be pulling up the spoilers for us in real time, so you'll see the card that we're talking about, but also, obviously, if you guys want to follow along at home and read them not directly on the screen, you can do that as well. So that's very exciting stuff. So, Steven.
Cameron.
I'm out of breath. That was a lot of talking.
Yeah.
We've made the decision to start talking about Goja, because
Tamer.
we're going to save the best for last, of course. So I gotta say, right, Tamer's always difficult for me. It's been difficult, I think, to sort of understand what they want to do with the Tamer identity, because thus far, Tamer has basically only been Sylvie, right? Like, we had Sylvie, and then we had new Sylvie, and so obviously there's some ancillaries between old Sylvie and new Sylvie, but it was very unclear if that's sort of going to be the Tamer identity, and I think with Goja, we do have the official Tamer identity. So let's start by going over her level 1, which is Goja Chosen Disciple. She's a level 1 Tamer Human, 19 life, Norm Champion. On enter, if you don't control a Fate Stone Regalia, reveal all cards in your material deck. Then put a Fate Stone Regalia with the lowest memory cost from among them onto the field.
Hey, Ken, what's a Fate Stone?
Dude, who knows? Fate Stones are a new type. I believe they're all... I actually don't know what type they are on their front side. Question mark. They're not Fantasias, right? They might items, I guess?
Regalia Item Tamer.
Yeah, so they're a new item type that have a flip side. We're doing double face cards in HVN, and these Fate Stones have a front side, which is an item, and then on that item there's a condition to flip that card to its other side, which is an ally, and they all have this the same keyword. Fate Stone, Fate Bound is their sort of keyword, and so Goja is sort of like Slime Sylvie was a slime tribal deck. Goja is this Fate Bound tribal deck, so that seems to be our new Tamer identity, which obviously makes sense that we're sticking to that sort of tribal theme, and I assume Tamers in the future will be some other different type of ally that they will, be sort of focused on.
Right. It's very tribal.
Yeah. So level 1 Goja, you get that sweet Fate Stone in play. Level 2 Goja Blessed Scion is a level 2 normal Tamer Human, 22 life, with Goja Lineage, of course. On enter, you may put 2 quest counters on Goja if you don't draw a card. She then also has Lineage Release, so as long as she's in your inner lineage, so not when you level up to her, but when you go to level 3. Lineage Release, negate target activation or trigger that targets a Fate Stone or Fate-bound object you control.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Does protect her big dummies a little bit. We'll talk about the big dummies after we go over all of her text. She also does a new counter type in quest counters. Quest counters are not a functional counter. They're sort of functional counters, one of which we'll talk about later. Stuff like enlightenment counters that do something innately, level counters. Quest counters do not have innate text, but there is other cards that Goja plays in her deck that do care about quest counters, and that's sort of her whole gimmick. Moving on to level 3 Goja, who is a Luxum champion. Goja Heaven's Favored. This is the one that we saw the blurry art of for 6 weeks, not knowing what it did. Level 3 Tamer Human, 25 life. As long as you control a Shenju ally, this card costs 3 less to materialize.
Does that mean it's free?
It does mean it's free, and it probably will be free most games. Has Goja Lineage, of course. And then it says, on enter, you may put 3 quest counters on Goja if you don't recover 3. Now, Steven.
Yeah.
If you're at home and for some reason this is the first time you've seen any of the spoilers, thank you for watching. But you might be saying to yourself, Steven, these cards don't seem very good. They don't do anything. What does her level 3 do? It basically does nothing. It recovers 3,
right.
Put some quest counters on you. Why is it free? Who knows? I think it is very important for us to talk about what these big old Fate Stones are. I'm going to pull up the one that starts in her Recollection deck, because I think that's the easiest one to talk about. So what is a Fate Stone, chat? Why are you playing Goja? What does she get out of your material deck? Why do you have to reveal your whole material deck? And what are these quest counters? And what's all that nonsense? So Goja is she's a Hearthstone deck, Steven.
Pokemon trainer.
She's a Pokemon trainer. She's all these different things. She's a quest-based deck, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
Not at all what I would have expected. Obviously, I'm always sort of floored by the design from the GA team, because none of it is ever anything that I think makes perfect sense. Although we were very right about some Dao Chen things we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at Fabled Azurite Fatestone. This is the Fatestone that comes in Goja's Recollection deck. Obviously, both the heroes we're talking about today are Recollection decks, so they do have a way that they're built initially, but Goja actually has a really cool way to sort of differentiate her deck building. So, Fabled Azurite Fatestone is a 10-cost Arcane Regalia item, Tamer Fatestone, Immortal, and Spell Shroud. So it cannot be destroyed by any means. There was a clarification from the developers is the only way that Immortal can be removed from the board is the unique rule, which is impossible to satiate. So it cannot die. It has Spell Shroud, so it also cannot be targeted. Goja bonus, at the end of, or at the beginning of your end phase, you may banish a card at random from your memory. If you do, draw a card. Goja bonus, when you banish a card from your memory, put a quest counter on your champion, and then you can rest this. You may remove 10 quest counters from your champion. If you do, wake up and transform Fabled Azurite Fatestone into Seiryu Azure Dragon, which is a 10 memory cost arcane ally tamer beast Shenju Fatebound Dragon.
Woo! Keywords.
Woo boy! Has Spell Shroud and Taunt as a 4/12. Has Goja bonus on attack. Choose one. Generate an Arcane Blast card and banish it. As long as it is banished, you may activate it, ignoring its elemental requirements, or empower X +2, where X is the amount of Arcane element cards in your banished, presuming only these Arcane Blasts being generated by this big dragon. Man, that's a Yu-Gi-Oh card if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, lots of text.
It's got 15 lines of text to talk about. So for the uninitiated that don't exactly understand what's going on here, the way that Goja works is she has these several Shenju that she can summon. That's sort of what her lore is pointed to, these auspicious beasts that are going to come down from heaven and save Sangwo from this evil terror that's lurking somewhere, God, who knows. And so the way that Goja's built is technically you can play more than one of these giant Fatestones in your material deck. You're very much incentivized not to do that. They've made it pretty clear that you're probably supposed to choose one and build your deck around it. So we have this Arcane Fatestone. We've seen a couple of other ones that we'll talk about a little bit in a bit. But the whole plan is all of these giant Fatestones have a quest that Goja needs to complete, both on her champion text and on the Fatestone itself. They have a condition for her getting quest counters, and then they remove a certain amount of quest counters to flip into this unstoppable monster Shenju that, assumingly, you should be able to ride into the pearly gates of victory. I think she's super cool. Yeah, Steve, tell me how you feel. I've been yapping too much.
I love this character. I don't know how good she's going to be.
Seems good.
She seems great, especially the not so much Seiryu, but the other two Shenju that we've seen seem very strong. They both have very strong abilities. I think the design of this is so unique and different than most card games I've ever seen. I'm floored by it, to be honest. And like, not only is it these giant Fatestones, but like all of her allies are similar to this.
Yeah, they're all like smaller. They don't require quest counters, but they do all in and of themselves have a sort of quest that you have to complete, right? It's like do X amount of times, and then you flip them. Yeah. So they all have this sort of mini game that they want you to complete, which I think is really cool. And what I had mentioned a few seconds ago is that the addition of these other Shenju that she can play sort of points you in the direction, who knows what the meta Goja deck will look like, right? But it points you in the direction of sort of choosing one of these big Shenju Fatestones and building your deck around it. As all of the ones that we've seen so far, we haven't seen all of them right now, but all of the ones that we've seen so far have a very distinct sort of play style that they want you to be pointed towards. Some are a little bit more advanced element focused, like this Arcane Dragon sort of does want you to push yourself, I think, farther up, leveling closer to 3 and getting access to some of the advanced element stuff that Goja has access to, whereas like the Fire and the Wind one that we've seen are a little bit more aggressive and can lean towards a game plan that doesn't really require you to even touch your advanced element. I think it's a really interesting way to differentiate deck building without it just being like pile of the best cards that you can put into your deck, right? Which is obviously something that you see happen in card games, in Grand Archive, whatever, a lot, is that decks like this, water mill deck that has been dominating the format lately is just like, how can we put all of the best water cards that have very little innate synergy with each other, slam them all into the same pile, and
Right.
Just hope it works out. So yeah, I think this is really cool. It does remind me a lot of Quest decks and Hearthstone, and I would be shocked if the development team didn't take some sort of inspiration from that. I think it's really cool. I love a mini game. I love sort of a game plan that requires you to think outside of the box and play the game differently, right?
Right.
Like the whole time that you're playing Gojo, you're not thinking about how can I maximize the damage dealt to my opponent, et cetera, et cetera. You're like, I have to complete this quest, and when I complete this quest, that is how I will in turn win the game. And so it's a cool.
It's like a little mini game while you're playing the game.
Yeah, it feels like a like alternate win condition cards in other games that say, you win the game or whatever. I think are like usually pretty lame, but they are sort of in that same vein where they want you to play the game differently than you normally would. And I think this is a good meeting of both, where you get to play the game in a way that you wouldn't normally, but you also are still killing your opponent with allies, as tamers should be. Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, super cool. As far as cards we want to talk about in relation to Goja, we should, of course, talk about her other Shenju, which we've seen. As of now, 2 of. We got the second one at 2 a.m. Last night. Before we carry on talking about Shenju, something that I want to say for all you lovely people out there in the audience. Obviously, we're talking about some spoilers today, and we appreciate you guys hanging out with us. But please, we encourage you to support all of the amazing content creators that are making spoilers for this game. Of course, you can find all the spoilers afterwards, but it doesn't cost you anything to click on their video or go to the website where these were spoiled, just to show some support for the content creators for GA. So we would very much appreciate that. We know it means a lot to us, and we can 100% say that it means a lot to the other content creators as well. If you want to check the spoiler schedule for both websites and content creators, you can find it at the top of the page on proxiescodex.com. So, moving on. Which one do you want to do, Steve? We got a green boy, we got a red boy.
I want to talk about the green boy because I really
green boy.
like the tiger.
Green boy's the new one. People are hype on the green boy.
I love the green boy. All right, so we're talking about Fabled Emerald Fatestone. So wind, 8 memory cost, Regalia item, Tamer Fatestone. It also has Immortal and Spell Shroud. Goja bonus, pay 4, rest it. As a spell, suppress another target item, weapon, or ally. Activate this ability only once. Goja bonus, whenever you suppress an object, put a quest counter on your champion. You may remove 8 quest counters from your champion. If you do, wake up and transform Fabled Emerald Fatestone, and it becomes Byaku, White Tiger, which is a wind, 8 cost, ally, tamer, beast, Shenju, fate-bound tiger. Spell Shroud and Vigor. Goja bonus, the first animal or beast card you activate each turn costs 2 less. Goja bonus, beast allies you control lose pride, and this is a 6/6. This card is wild and does some wild stuff and makes beasts super cool.
He big tiger.
6/6
is pretty strong. Vigor is nice as well.
Yeah.
All of these Shenju have Spell Shroud, which makes them a little bit harder to deal with. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think sort of what we were talking about a moment ago, where this is a little bit, I think, more focused on the early game. Mm-hmm. However, it is not a necessarily easy task to suppress 8 things.
Yeah.
Suppress things 8 times. There is some cute synergies, though, that are built into the Fatestone, which I think is really interesting. That this is, I think, the only one, I guess the red one a little bit, but this is the only one that has a really direct way for you to interact with your quest counters, in that it has that 4 reserve cost rest to suppress a thing.
Yeah.
But they very smartly made this activate this ability only once. However, with the text being put the quest counter on your champion, which is what we assumed it would do. That is official. There's an errata that'll come out.
Yep.
You can activate your Fate Stone, suppress something, then flicker your Fate Stone, like suppress your Fate Stone with something else, and then it resets its once ability, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
So I think it will take some time, like a few turns, for you to do this, and obviously it should. These are your big, like, boss monsters, right? That you want to finish the game with. But it is like pretty self-sufficient with cards like you guessed it, Baby Green Slime looking pretty good. It's crazy that they printed a slime card for Goja.
Yeah, the slime package is crazy. But the first thing I thought about when I saw this was Tempest Silverback.
Yeah, Big Monkey.
You put Big Monkey out, 2/6/6 for 2, pretty good.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think if you're staying low to the ground, though, that is certainly the end all be all. Is Big Monkey for sure.
Yeah,
so there are a lot of beasts that you can like incidentally turn off Pride, but like none of them are great. But Big Monkey is great.
Yeah, you just slam it.
2 cost 6/6 is quite strong, for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
and then each of these Shenju all have a spell associated with them.
Right.
And I think that also, bonuses the rest of the effect for this.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. That they each have a command. We've seen
one for each that we've seen.
Yeah, I don't remember. Oh yeah. I was trying to think of the Phoenix command, but
the Phoenix command is great.
I've personally been like pretty underwhelmed with them. I think they're like cool design space, and they're supposed to like be the signature spell, right, of these Shenju. I think the Phoenix one is the only one that like sort of stuck out to me, but
I think this one can end the game, right?
Yeah, we can we can pull it up. It's Byaku's command, and it's a 2-cost wind that puts a buff counter on target ally, and then if that ally is a Shenju, you wake him up. So it gives you 2 attacks with your big tiger, but I think something that Trevor said last night is that like if you're casting this on your Shenju, you've probably won that game anyways, right? Like maybe a little bit win more. I don't know. I felt that same way about the Seiryu one as well. I think the Phoenix one is the one that I've been most impressed with. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but an interesting design for sure. I'm really excited to see what the water Shenju is. I assume we'll see it during spoiler season over the next week or so. It's not ours. Crazy. They didn't give us tamer cards. While we're on the Shenju train, let's also take a look at Mr. Redman, which personally I think is the one that I'm the most excited for. I think. As somebody who's not like traditionally a tamer player, like I'll probably not be playing any of these tamer decks. Crazy, I know. This is the one that seems strongest to me. I think we've been in a stage in the game where fire support has been just terrible, and like fire lately has been just awful. But all of the cards that we've seen for HVN, tamer regardless, I think the fire pool is getting a lot stronger. We've seen a lot of good fire cards. So Fabled Ruby Fate Stone is a fire 7 memory cost Regalia item. Tamer Fate Stone, crazy. It is immortal and Spell Shroud as well. Goja bonus at the beginning of your recollection phase, deal 1 damage to each champion. Goja bonus whenever non-combat damage is dealt to 1 or more units by a fire element source you control, put a quest counter on your champion. You may rest this. You may remove 7 quest counters from your champion. If you do, wake up and transform Fabled Ruby Fate Stone into Suzaku Vermilion Phoenix. Is a 7-cost fire ally tamer beast Shenju Fatebound Phoenix, 4 power, 3 life. Has Spell Shroud and Goja bonus on banish. You may banish 3 fire element cards from your graveyard. If you do, return Suzaku to the field, transformed as the Phoenix, as normally when one of these Fate Stones would come back into play, it would come back on its front side, which is the Fate Stone, but this does specifically say that you bring it back into play transformed as the Phoenix. I think this card's nuts.
Yeah, this card is fantastic.
It's 4/3, it's like nigh unkillable. Very, very hard to remove this card, especially if you're playing a fire deck. It has a pretty attainable condition, only needs 7 quest counters, which is so far the least that you need. And also its recollection trigger does give you a little bit of agency in that regard as well. It does give you 1 quest counter at the beginning of all of your recollection phases, which is nice. It's when damage is dealt to 1 or more units by a fire element source.
Okay.
So since they trigger at the same time, it is only 1 quest counter. I believe that's the way this card is worded. But yeah, so it's like pretty attainable, especially if you're playing these fire decks that we've said, are getting a lot of support, but are also like traditionally pretty low to the ground. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but there is a sort of sub-theme in Tamer Fire that we've seen, which is making these Direwolf tokens, which are 2/1 tokens that, blow up when they attack, but makes lots of small attacks to sort of work on this Suzaku thing. So I'm like pretty scared about this card beating people to death pretty quick. Something that traditionally in Grand Archive, the fire aggro deck stuff like Fire Xander, right, which saw a lot of play in the beginning of the format. Something that those decks are traditionally missing is a way to close the door. And I think Suzaku is obviously very good at doing that. It's really hard to remove, and so if you're playing that sort of low to the ground, aggressive fire strategy, and you can, deal your opponent 15, 18 points of damage over the course of the first few turns, which is not unheard of at all. And it's hard for you to close out that last bit of damage. Having a very resilient threat, I think, is really good to do that. So I would be surprised if we didn't see some Fire Tamer making a splash on the scene, especially as we're getting a little bit more fire support, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So those are our 3 Shenju that Goja's getting. We have not yet seen the last one. I believe, there should only be 4, right? The 4 auspicious beasts. The last one is Big Turtle.
Yep.
Water Big Turtle. We will probably see at some point this week. I'm sure we'll talk about that at the end of the week. One other thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to Goja, before we get a move on to the obviously more exciting cleric portion of the program, is Goja's advance element, which I think is really interesting. They said in the design notes that this is the first time that they are designing a champion, Goja, with their advanced element playing more of a supportive role, as usually champions that go to level 3 and have this advanced element is usually these big, like, flashy finisher cards, right? Mm-hmm. This is how, your arcane decks, your crux decks, or whatever, your Terra decks, Astro decks, all end the game with these big, flashy spells and allies that they get at their advanced element. But almost all of the cards in Luxem that we've seen, and I think by design, are sort of a little bit more supportive, right? Like cards that help you further your win condition, but none of them are really ever going to finish the game. And so I think it puts Goja into a really interesting spot. And I think this is why Goja's level 3 is often free as well. Mm-hmm. Puts her into an interesting spot where she doesn't really need these Luxem cards. So I'm really curious how folks are going to build her, where she's not that sort of traditional level 3 deck. So I wonder how many of these Luxem cards are going to see play.
Right.
What are those ratios going to look like? Because this is the first time that we've sort of had a champion that functions like this.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that a lot of these Luxem cards that we've seen already aren't really class bonus.
Right.
So they kind of exist in this weird place where, like, Xander might be picking up some of these cards.
Yeah, there's a couple that I think could see some play in Xander, which I think is on purpose.
Right.
Surely, right. We see this a little bit with the arcane pool as well, which is very, very small. But they've printed a couple of arcane cards to go alongside Sarayu, the arcane auspicious beast, that are like sort of meant to help Rai, like a little bit.
They seem really good in Rai.
Yeah, they're okay. But before we get too off topic, there's one card that I would be remiss if we didn't bring it up. I think it is obviously worth talking about, at least all of the URs that we've seen for HVN so far, and that is in this sort of same vein of Luxem being this supportive element for Goja, they showed us Glorious Presence, which is a Luxem card that Goja has access to. Again, doesn't have any class bonus, but it does sort of have to work with Goja, so it requires you have a Shenju in play. As a 2-cost Luxem, Unique Fantasia. Going to see a lot of Fantasias today. Tamer Spell. As long as you control a Shenju ally, advanced element cards your opponents activate cost 2 more to activate. I think this card's kind of crazy. I don't know if other people are as high on this card as I am. I guess I come from a background where I really like casting Cosmic Bolts, and so I like sort of hate the existence of this card.
Yeah.
That is pretty non-committal and just will probably help Goja lock out some of her advanced element brethren if she's gotten to the point where her Shenju is alive and she needs to sort of ride the game out. She can, put this Glorious Presence in play, even against other decks like, Luxem Xander is a great example of somebody that, might be harder for her to deal with because of all that recursive healing and stuff. This does make it hard for Xander to close out the game. So, all right. I think that's all I had in my mental list. Is there any other Goja cards you want to talk about before we get it moving?
I don't think so. I think most of it is just the Shenju are really cool, and I'm excited to see where more stuff for her.
Yeah, it's always a thrill for me where I don't have to say it a million times, but like the Tamer's not the one for me. But I was like super impressed with how she's designed and how interesting that she is. That I'm sure I'll try it out. I really do like quest decks. I think it is cool to have those alternate sort of gameplay styles built into your deck building, and so I think that they've done a really cool job with Goja. And even though she won't be the person I put 500 hours into, I think it's really cool that other people will have the ability to. I think what I was worried a little bit about with Tamer is Tamer in the beginning of the game was terrible.
Yeah.
But when Slimes came out, Slimes is a really good deck, and I think a cool deck in its own right, but is heralded by the community as this sort of like easier entry point into the game, and of course it is. I mean, Allies decks in general, right, are going to usually stay in that easier entry point for people to sort of grasp, right? I use my allies, I attack you with them is pretty clear. But I think it's cool that they're keeping that Tamer identity, where I think, again, these Fate-bound Fate Stones are going to be fairly easy to understand, but it gives you that extra level of complexity with these quests to sort of be able to play something that's a little bit deeper than just, I play Storm Slime, you die. It's got a little bit more play to it, though. So I think that is really cool. All right. Now that's all out of the way. Ooh, baby. It's Dao Chan time. Steve, you want to read some Dao Chans for me?
Yeah, I can read some Dao Chans for you. We have Dao Chan Enchantress, level 1 champion cleric human.
She's hot.
On enter, put 2 glimmer counters on Dao Chan. Inherited effect, rest, activate a reaction card from your memory, pay its reserve cost only by removing that many glimmer counters from Dao Chan. Activate this ability only during your opponent's turn.
What? Yeah, I think maybe at least easier to talk about Dao Chan once we have both her level 1 and her level 2 in the rear view, so that we can talk about them sort of as a whole, and then I think her level 3 is pretty different.
All right. So level 2 Dao Chan, Dreaming Wish, champion cleric human. Dao Chan Lineage, inherited. At the beginning of your end phase, if amount of glimmer counters on Dao Chan is less than the amount of Fantasias you control, put that many glimmer counters on Dao Chan to equal the difference.
She's a weird one, man. We sort of had our suspicions about what Dao Chan would do, but as usual, it turns out I'm not a game designer for a reason. She's way different than I would have expected. She is the most of probably any champion ever. Yeah. A deck that is sort of very pointed in one direction. I think there's maybe going to be some cute things that you can do in Wind. There's I think a pretty unique burn style deck that you can do in Fire, but I think the Dao Chen is very much pointed at being a water deck. The ability for her to activate reaction cards for free is nuts. It allows her to do some like pretty disgusting things, where even in the like sort of meta right now where everyone's playing Icebound Slams, can you imagine if you put your entire hand down to play an Icebound Slam and then you can also hold up a counterspell for free? It's like pretty crazy. Obviously, hopefully that's not what I'm doing with her, but we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. She's in sort of a weird place where I feel like there's a lot of water fatigue right now.
Yeah.
People are kind of sick about of the stupid Icebound Slams and stratagems, but she does hold them pretty well. She is does definitely look pretty strong. I know there's a lot of people out there that don't like negates so much, and just in her recollection deck, I think there's 3 or 4 new ones. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of negates running around. A lot of them are going to be free, but I think she is extremely powerful. Like obviously her champion text I think is a lot more insular than something like Goja's, where Goja like basically is not a deck that functions if you take away her like big the Shenju Fadestone stuff. Whereas Dao Chen I think is just like overtly very powerful. Being able to cast or activate anything for free is nuts. I don't know if you guys have played card games before. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a card called 3 Visits. Free cards are broken. It's very easy to make free cards broken, and so I think Dao Chen looks really strong. Before we dig into her card pool, we can talk about Dao Chen level 3, as we now do have what that text means as well.
Yep. So Dao Chen level 3 is Dao Chen Ideal Corsage. So champion, cleric human. On enter, choose any amount of non-champion objects and put a wither counter on each of them. Whenever a non-token object an opponent controls is destroyed, you may banish it. If you do, that opponent summons a flower bud token.
25 life.
25 life.
Oh man, Steve.
Oh boy.
Oh man.
Do you know how good it feels to be right all of the time?
Yeah, I put a clip up on my Twitter last week where it was us basically reading this text verbatim, which is nuts. I swear to God we didn't know anything.
Yeah.
We're just too big brain.
We just have played so many card games, and these words just mean so much to us that we were like, oh yeah, this is what she does.
I remember going on a big diatribe about how I think my favorite thing to happen would be if the flower buds had no text.
Yeah. And then I'm pretty sure I talked about
it's like, oh, what if they bloom into something?
What if they bloom into other flowers? Oh man, we're so good at this.
She's so cool, man. I said that when she came out, and we didn't really have her text. We now know what these do. So without us, sort of spitballing or whatever, wither counters are a functional counter. So unlike quest counters that we talked about earlier, wither counters are a functional counter that have text on their own, sort of like enlightenment counters. So wither counters say at the beginning of your main phase, if you control any objects with wither counters on them, you must pay reserve equal to the amount of wither counters on that object, or you sacrifice it. So when Dao Chen comes into play, she puts wither counters on all of your opponent's stuff. At the beginning of their next main phase, they do have to pay 1 for each of those wither counters or sacrifice the object that it is attached to. Notably, this is a main phase trigger, the first of its kind. So interesting that we're now delving into that main phase trigger sort of world, but also means that you don't get like locked out if you put your whole hand down, right? It's after your recollection, after your draw step. So you will have some sort of agency in that regard, but still obviously a very powerful effect. And then should any of those non-token objects of your opponents be destroyed, either by wither counters or otherwise, you may banish that card after it is destroyed and put a flower bud token into play under your opponent's control. Flower buds themselves don't have any text. However, there are a couple of cards that we can talk about now, I suppose, before we talk about Dao Chen as a whole, that turn those flower bud tokens into a sweet of different flowers. So first we can talk about Bloom Summer's Glow.
Yeah, Bloom Summer's Glow is a 2 reserve cost Terra action cleric spell. Class bonus, each opponent sacrifices all flower buds. For each flower bud sacrificed this way, their controller summons your choice of a Lycoria or a Baihua token. Element bonus, you can pay 2, discard this card from your hand, empower 2, and draw a card. So what is a Lycoria and a Baihua? Lycoria says at the beginning of your recollection phase, deal 1 unpreventable damage to your champion. This is a token Fantasia Cleric flower. And then Bahua is a token Fantasia Cleric flower. At the beginning of your recollection phase, each opponent recovers 1.
Yeah, definitely your way to finish the game.
Yeah.
Right. Allegedly. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of other things that sort of peck away at your opponent, right? She's very much pointed in this control deck style. So I'm sure you'll have other ways to deal damage. There's a couple of other cards that we've seen that deal damage. She's obviously also going to be a Fantasia deck, as is very clear from her her level 2 effect. So you'll have stuff like refracting missiles as well. But these flower buds are probably the way that she's going to end most games. I think the really interesting part about it is this Summer's Bloom that makes Lycoria and Baihua usually, I assume, going to be Lycoria that deals your opponent damage, but they put a check into place, which I think is really interesting, that the other Bloom sort of interacts with decks that you don't necessarily want to deal damage. This, we obviously can point to stuff like Jin, or if you put a bunch of Lycoria into play for Jin, he could not give a shit.
And is going to kill you.
Yeah, so you do need a way to finish the game otherwise, so I think that's really
So
cool.
we have another card. It's called Bloom Winter's Chill. It's a 3 reserve cost Terra action cleric spell. Class bonus, each opponent sacrifices all flower buds. For each flower bud sacrificed this way, their controller summons your choice of a Nightshade or a Flood Bloom token. And it has the same element bonus where you can pay 2 to discard it from your hand, empower 2, and draw a card. So what Nightshade does is a lot. It's a paragraph of text. It's a 1-cost Terra token Fantasia Cleric flower. At the beginning of your recollection phase, put a wither counter on target non-champion, non-token object you control. And then it has the reminder text for wither. And then Flood Bloom is a 1-cost Terra token Fantasia Cleric flower. At the beginning of your recollection phase, banish the top 2 cards of your deck.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, you're only playing one of these. It's very rarely you're probably ever playing the Nightshade.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very similar to the other one, right? Where I think 90% of the time you're going to be getting Lycoria with Summer's Bloom, and then probably 90% of the time you're going to be getting Flood Bloom with
Winter's Chill.
Winter's Chill. Also interesting. I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but I find it very strange that Winter's Bloom costs 3 and Summer's Bloom costs 2.
Yeah,
it's like probably not an important distinction, but it is a distinction that they made, which I find really interesting. Maybe they're worried about Flood Bloom being maybe a little bit strong. I don't know. Like maybe it turns out you don't even play something like Lycoria, right? Like maybe Flood Bloom turns out to be strong enough that you can just mill people out.
Yeah.
Who knows? People love that. But yeah, I think it's definitely interesting to be able to staple these win conditions onto each of these cards, but also staple a sort of utility piece on the other end. Like, I can see a world where you're playing against a deck where you just want to give them a bunch of Nightshade, which effectually locks them out of the game, right? Because they can just never keep permanents on the board ever if they have a bunch of these Nightshades in play.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely interesting. I assume this is probably going to be how she deals most of her damage, but I think it's going to end up being like other control decks where the game is effectually over long before you kill them. And so that is something that I do find typically a little bit problematic in Grand Archive. We see this in like Luxem is a perfect example, right? Where people in a competitive setting, and no fault to them, but maybe don't understand when a game has ended and drag these games out and cause auction to go to time every game. Or I think this will be pretty similar, that you effectually lock somebody out of the game, but it's going to take 15 years for you to actually present something that kills them. But yeah, I think it's super cool. I love this idea of tokens being the way that you kill your opponent slowly over time. That's very, very me-pilled for sure.
Yeah. I'm also really excited about Season's End. Season's End is a 10-cost Terra action cleric spell with Diao Chen bonus. This card costs 1 less to activate for each wither counter on objects on the field. Destroy each object with a wither counter on it. So it is just I don't want to wait till next turn. I'm going to destroy everything this turn.
Yeah, it's a way to, against decks that influence is less important, it's a way to actually remove those objects from the board.
Right.
I think I was very confused when we read Diao Chen level 3 the first time, and she allows you to put wither counters on your own things. But you don't make flower buds under your control. You don't want flower buds under your control. So I found it really weird that you could wither your own stuff, and it was very unclear to me why that was. And I think it is exclusively for Season's End, and maybe other cards like it, but Season's End is the only one that we've seen where if you're in the situation where you really need to remove a board, or like your opponent's going to have enough reserve to pay the wither, which is not, out of the question. I mean, if you're only putting 5 wither counters out when you hit level 3, it's not insane for your opponent to have 5 cards in hand, right? Mm-hmm. This is a way for you to sort of manipulate that, and so we saw. You guys can go back and find it. I think it's actually really interesting and worth a watch. That TM32 did a stream where they played some games of the Recollection decks. This was a couple of days ago, but most notably, not that I don't love the TM32 guys, Silidar played a couple of games on stream, and so if you guys want to see the deck sort of, at least like in the developer's hands, in how it's sort of intended to be played, right? You can watch Sil play not only Goja, but also Diao Chen, and makes really effective use of Season's End, which I think is really interesting. I do have one gripe about Season's End, though. We didn't mention it, but we can circle back now and make Trevor work really hard. Is that Season's End is the exclusive CPR or CSR for the Recollection deck. So you can, in your sealed Recollection deck, you can get a Season's End CSR, which is gorgeous. I'm sure that's what we have up on the board. Trevor knows that we want to look at the fancy art. Not only is this a main deck CSR, but it's a
playable main deck CSR,
and it's a Recollection deck exclusive. This card's gonna be a fucking $1 billion.
Yeah,
and you're like, I would be remiss if you're playing like a Terra Diao Chen deck, and you're not playing like 3, probably 4 copies of this card. I think it does seem very strong. Oh, man. Recollection deck exclusive. There was some talk at locals going around that there would not be exclusive Recollection deck CSRs. I want to just be the first to tell you I told you so. But also, I hate it. I just so miserable.
I just would like to point out the godly noise Cam made when they announced that this was the Recollection.
I was so mad.
He wailed something fiercely in my small car.
Yeah. It looks so good too.
Yeah.
Pora says it looks really good in person. Thanks, Travis. That's so helpful.
And since we're on the topic of it, the Goja Recollection CSR that you can get is Arcane Blast. So RIP to Rye players who will need 4
Dude,
of this.
it's like unreal sick. I was like so excited when we saw Arcane Blast. I used to be a Rye player. I don't know if you guys knew that. Back in the old days, I played a lot of Rye, and I probably would play a lot of Rye now if he was a cute girl, but he doesn't pass the test, right? But yeah, these Arcane Blasts are absolutely gorgeous, and
yeah.
We thankfully did eventually get to see the Arcane Blast. We didn't get to see it live for the developer stream because Theo stole it I don't know why Theo stole the Arcane Blast,
but we did get it on his Twitter later on.
Some sort of ploy to have it disappear. I think
it's probably because Leo probably would have taken it.
That's true. That's fair. It was to protect it from Leo. It makes a little bit more sense. That's what Theo can.
He did. He was whispering us that he was going to.
I'm
going to
take it. They can't hear this. Yeah. Sorry, Leo. I don't want to blow up your spot.
I did.
Main deck CPRs are frightening. There was a problem with the other Recollection decks, right? Where like a real amount of Reco decks got purchased by people that didn't need them, and they're supposed to be starter products. They got purchased by people that didn't need them, sort of hunting for
CPRs.
Yeah, CSRs in Sylvia and Tristan. Thankfully, it's sort of a double-edged sword in that regard. That did also mean that there was a lot of searched Recollection decks that were sold pretty cheap, and so hopefully, if you're a new player, you can sort of have those fall into your hands. I personally, I'm sure I gave out a bunch of them.
I know I did.
So I don't know how I feel about it. It's a bit of a gray area where obviously I know that you have to have these chase cards in the Recollection decks, otherwise established players won't buy up all the stock, right? Mm-hmm. But if you don't have those chase cards in these decks, the established players won't buy up all the stock, and that means that they're more accessible for new players. So I don't know. It's like not a problem when you have an enfranchised community, right? Like here where we play, we have a locals, and so even behind our counter right now, we have a bunch of search starter decks. So anytime somebody comes in that's like, hey, I want to try Grand Archive, I just hand them a free starter deck, right? And I'm sure that'll be the case with the Reco decks when I open 65 Diao Chan decks. But if you're at a store that is a little bit less enfranchised with Grand Archive, that will just sell out of the Recollection decks to whales like me, feels a little bit worse when you walk into that store and you're like, hey, I really want to try Grand Archive. I heard these new starter decks came out. And they're like, well, we don't have any stock because that cuck Lineage Break came in and buy all the Diao Chan decks. So we'll see. Anyways, sell me your Season's End. Give me a good price, please. I'm miserable. Before we get too far, we didn't actually really talk a whole lot about Diao Chan, just reading her advanced element stuff. She is Fantasia focused, which I think is pretty cool. It's the first time we were actually getting Fantasia payoff. We've been getting these cleric fractals since FTC, and they were, when fractals were created, the developers were really clear that like, this is a cleric thing. Fractals will usually be cleric stuff. And I'm like, why? And then we got ALC, and Arisana doesn't give a shit about fractals. I was like, this is just like very strange. I don't know why we're getting all these fractal cards, and we got Burst Asunder and A and B, and I'm like, what are they trying to do with this whole fractal thing? And now it's very clear that all of that fractal setup was supposed to be for Diao Chan, so she is that holder of cleric fractals, but also of other Fantasias. I think this does add a lot of relevance to cards like UD. Of course, I'm sure you guys could have seen UD coming, that UD is going to be good in the Diao Chan deck. It has Diao Chan on it. Wild. But also cards like Dusklight Communion, I think is now a really interesting card, not only because there's going to be so many Fantasias in the meta, so it does have that sort of good in the mirror flavor, but also it itself is a Fantasia, and so it adds to your Fantasia count, which is very important for not only Diao Chan level 3, maybe some other stuff. But yeah, I think it's cool to explore that sort of card type. So cool to see some play. Dusklight Stonks is cool. UD Stonks is cool. I really like the idea of unique Fantasias. Yeah. I guess I just really like the idea of uniques. I think the Oath of the Sakura deck was really cool. I think the idea that she now at least has a couple of unique Fantasias. Hopefully we see more throughout the spoiler season. I think it's cool to have your sort of board full of these very specific things that you can't have duplicates of, that all have a very unique effect, right? Yeah. Obviously Dusklight UD are very unique cards.
Yeah, very Silver Bullet-esque.
Yeah, and I think that's really neat. I don't know that there'll be enough of them. Maybe eventually there'll be enough of them, but I think it is really cool to be able to play Silver Bullets in your main deck, because they give you that sort of ancillary upside, right? Because Fantasia count just matters for your Glimmer for Diao Chan level 2. So you're not extremely punished if there's a Dusklight Communion in your deck if you're not playing against a Fracturized Lantern, right?
Right.
Like the old days, you were like, oh man, I draw my Dusklight and it's the worst card in my deck because they're not playing Lantern. But at least now you can be like, well, yeah, it doesn't do a whole lot, but at least I can, put it into play, for my Diao Chen ability.
Yeah.
Same with UD if you're playing against a
You just
non-ally.
You just
deck.
slam it, right? And you do the Umbra one.
Yeah.
And give them -1 level, and then their Heavenly Guides mean nothing.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting. It is two-sided is Dustlight Communion as well. Not going to spend this whole show talking about Dustlight Communion. But yeah, in addition to the Fantasia stuff, we've obviously gotten a bunch of reactions as well, much like we did with Gojo. We're not going to go over all these reactions, but lots of new negates, a couple of interesting ones. We now have redirect flow, which is a way to interact with triggers, which I think is interesting. They've also sort of clarified how that works. There's now 2 cards. It's on Goja's level 2 Lineage release, and also now on redirect flow is the word trigger in rules text, which now just sort of refers to any triggered ability, which I think is interesting that we're now using that typing for foreseeably the future. So yeah, I think Diao Chen's really cool. I'm super excited to play with her. I do worry a little bit about the speed of the game. I know, like I said, there's a lot of water fatigue right now, and it is, I think, unfortunate that I think people would be a lot more excited for Diao Chen if we weren't coming off the back of a very slow water meta. Like, imagine if, Diao Chen was in A and B, right, where we weren't really playing water cards basically at all. And then, it's like a bunch of slimes, and people are like, oh, sick, finally a control deck to deal with the slimes players. But now we're like, everybody's playing these water control decks, and she's probably going to be pretty good at just playing that same water control deck that we've seen see a lot of play this season. So yeah. I'm obviously very excited for her in the Terra aspect. I think I'm very much an advanced element guy.
Yeah, she definitely does feel like a better answer than Ari to that deck.
What to
like the mill strategy that exists now?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like free the negates are good,
and
so it's going to be pretty hard for a lot of these Icebound Slam decks to deal with Diao Chen, especially once she can level up to level 1, because it's very hard for them to play the game with negates. But also, it is worth noting that Viridian Trinket Stonks are going to be up huge as well, as that does affect Diao Chen's ability. So you guys can keep an eye out for that. But, hey, speaking of Terra, before we go too far, there's at least one last thing that we should talk about with you, chat. The CUR has also been revealed. Crazy, I know. It's not Rai. I'm sorry. We were wrong about that one.
We were right about level 4.
It is a level 4 champion. It is unfortunately not an Arcane Rai level 4 champion. But let me tell you, Steven, at 4 a.m. last night, when I should have been asleep planning for this podcast, and instead was just lying in bed thinking about Diao Chen, right? I've been really down on this card, Steven. I've been really down on it.
You have.
But I think
you've come full circle?
I think I might have changed my tune. We'll see. Why don't you give her a read?
All right. So, our level, well, we won't get ahead of ourselves. Lubu, Indomitable Titan, is a 4 reserve cost Terra unique ally warrior human with taunt and vigor. On attack, if this is Lubu's first attack of the turn, you may pay 2 and wake up Lubu. Diao Chen bonus, if your champion would die with exactly 32 damage counters on them, banish them, transform Lubu, and destroy all other objects you control instead. She's a 4/4. But if you meet her Diao Chen stipulation, she flips over into Lubu Wrath Incarnate, who is a level 4 champion, a warrior human, Exia, with vigor. Other champions get -3 level, and allies get -3 attack. On ally kill, deal X unpreventable damage to each other champion, where X is the killed ally's power plus its life stat. It's an 832.
Yeah. It's our first level 4 champion.
Yeah.
She's like giga ultra broken. Like if you flip into Lubu Wrath Incarnate, the game is over.
Yeah, you
It's
probably just won
like,
the game.
There's maybe 2 decks in the game that can deal with this, and that's like the spells decks, right? Like Ari or Rai. But you do give them -3 levels, which is a real kick in the pants, especially if you're Rai. It's just like, well, you lost 3 levels. Good luck casting that Arcane Blast, you dummy. Even against like Dao Chan, I guess, right? You just nice and power idiot. You're gonna cast those Arcane Blasts? No, you're not. So yeah, she's like giga broken, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But her flip condition is very difficult.
Yep.
So just for transparency, right? I was pretty down on Lubu when she came out. And a bunch of people in chat, in Discord or whatever, are like, oh, she's just like fine as an ally. That's the part that I've been most dubious on. She's really expensive, and I think that a lot of people are not accounting for how expensive that she is. Like, you are an advanced element deck. Card advantage is hard, especially when you're an advanced element deck that's trying to push levels, right? And so it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to cast Lubu, be able to activate Lubu, and hold up multiple pieces of interaction. Like, people are always saying about this card, they're like, oh, well, you're Dao Chan, so you'll have a reaction to play with your champion ability. And that's true. But, like, you tell me how many games you play at Advanced Element on turn, 5, where you can hold up a single Frostbind or whatever, and that's good enough to not die? Surely not. Right? So, I'm an Ari player, right? When I'm at that point in the game, most of my turns are pass. And Dao Chan's really good at that. Because if you pass, right, with your multiple pieces of interaction in hand, you pay for one,
and then you have the second one.
You get the other one that you paid for, right? So, she really does want to pass with a bunch of interaction up. So I do think it is a real risk to play Lubu. However, I think I've maybe come around on Lubu having some copies in your deck. People are right that she does end the game. So, if you get to the point where you've won the game, right, the game is controlled, that thing that we said earlier, where it's hard for you to close out the game, Lubu does that pretty quickly. But I like the idea that I think you're going to be playing a real amount of cards in your Dao Chan deck, both refracting missiles and the new
Fireball.
It deals damage equal to your Phantasias in play. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. Shimmering Reflection or something. So I think you're going to be playing a real amount of these cards in your deck. And if you are, and you're playing against Slimes or Ari or Rai or one of these decks that deals you lots of damage, not allies. I think Dao Chan's going to have a pretty easy time against allies. I really do. At least the medium ones. Like Slimes, I think she'll have a fine time. She'll maybe die to Fire Aggro like everybody does. But I think the ability to play a Lubu and have that sort of face down information that your opponent might actually just lose the game for themselves if they play something like a Storm Slime or a Cosmic Bolt or whatever, where you do have some level of interaction around that, I think could be quite powerful. I don't think that you're going to flip to Lubu very often, but I do think that the threat of flipping to Lubu is maybe worth a little bit more than I initially gave it credit.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that you are playing some amount of fractals in your deck.
Yeah.
So by that point, when you are playing Lubu, it's practically for free off fractals, I would assume.
Well, yes and no, right? Fractals pseudo replace themselves, but they're not card advantage, So, even if you play 3 fractals and you go -6, you have no cards in hand but 3 fractals, right? I agree that maybe you'll have more resources than another advanced element deck would, but the 6 is a lot, man.
You don't even. I would like to argue that you don't even need to do the 6 every turn.
I think if you're playing this card as a 4 cost 4/4, it's terrible. It's just playing Uther, right? And Uther's a bad card.
Fair.
If she's dealing 8 and she's killing a couple allies or dealing 8 to face, I think she's fine. But 6 is a lot. So we'll see. I think at least for the beginning of the format, I assume myself included, people will be playing a copy or 2 of Lubu in their deck. And maybe she ends up being worse than people imagine. Maybe she ends up being better than I imagine. I don't know, but I do think that her flip condition is a little bit less mimetic than people are giving it credit for. I think that's what I've come around on. I don't know how far I've come around on the ally itself, but I do think that her flip condition is a little bit less mimetic than people are actually giving it credit for. Where if you can, deal yourself 8 damage, basically, which you can, that's really the sweet spot that you're looking for.
Yeah.
It's like you're at 24, you deal yourself 8.
You can fireball target yourself.
Right. Yeah, who knows? So yeah, that's our CUR, by the way. Main deck CUR, in case you were curious. It's a main deck CUR. What are we doing? Who are we? For my fucking sake, I hope that I don't play this card. And I hope if I play this card, I'm playing 1. Because if...
I'm just going to...
Listen, man.
I'm just...
God,
there's no reason, Cam.
Jesus,
there's no reason.
Stupid.
There's no. It's
stupid.
It's a fucking warrior card. You're not buying it.
It literally has Dao Chan bonus printed on it.
Yeah, but it's a warrior.
It has Dao Chan bonus printed on it. This
I'm
card
just saying.
only works in cleric.
I'm just saying.
This is literally a cleric fucking class bonus printed on this card. All right. Anyways, it's her wife. They're gay together.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Anyways, I have to buy it. No, I don't have to buy it. Hopefully, I'll open one.
Hopefully, you'll just get foils.
All right. I think that's it, Steve. You got anything else you wanna raise to the people?
I don't.
That was a lot of talking.
There's a lot. There's a lot of
today.
stuff. Yeah.
It was a long show, and there's lots more to come. I'm sure we'll have way more spoilers to talk about next week. Of course, we want to remind you yet again, please, not just us. We, of course, appreciate you for being here. Thank you for watching. But, of course, support your other content creators for Grand Archive. It costs you nothing to click on their video. And I know that you can find the spoilers free, easy to navigate on proxiescodex.com. But you can also, click on the video. Give them a watch. I want to give a huge shout out to True Cactus Gaming. You can watch the absolute piece of cinema that was released last night. Maybe the magnum opus of Grand Archive spoiler videos.
Yeah,
last night.
I gotta say,
at 2 in the morning.
I gotta say it getting posted and then the link being deleted was really good.
It's just truly masterful the cinematography. So please go check that out. But check out all of the other spoilers as well. We have plenty more coming this week. You can find the spoiler schedule on Proxies Codex, as we said. You can find us not only here every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, doing the live show asterisk, but you can also find the previous episode of the podcast every Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the YouTube, and you can also find our spoiler video on Valentine's Day, February 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I was going to post it at midnight, but I decided I can make you all watch the podcast instead. So sorry. You'll have to wait for that. Anyways, that's all we have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you next week.
Thank you guys for watching.
Woo!
Woo!